Michael J. Roscoe was a careful man. The car that drove him to work at 7:15 each morning was a custom-made Mercedes with reinforced steel doors and bulletproof windows. His driver, a retired FBI agent, carried a Beretta subcompact semi-automatic pistol and knew how to use it. There were just 5 steps from the point where the car stopped to the entrance of Roscoe Tower on New York's 5th Avenue, but closed-circuit television cameras followed him every inch of the way. Once the automatic doors had slid shut behind him, a uniformed receptionist, also armed, watched as he crossed the foyer and entered his own private lift. The lift had white marble walls, a blue carpet, a silver handrail, and no buttons. Roscoe pressed his hand against a small glass panel. A sensor read his fingerprints, verified them, and activated the lift. The doors slid shut, and the lift rose to the 60th floor without stopping. Nobody else ever used it, nor did it ever stop at any of the other floors in the building. While it was travelling up, the receptionist was on the telephone, letting Mr. Roscoe's staff know that he was on his way. Everyone who worked in Roscoe's private office had been hand-picked and thoroughly vetted. It was impossible to see him without an appointment. Getting an appointment could take 3 months. When you're rich, you have to be careful. There are cranks, kidnappers, terrorists, the desperate and the dispossessed. Michael J. Roscoe was the chairman of Roscoe Electronics and the 9th or 10th richest man in the world, and he was very careful indeed. Ever since his face had appeared on the front cover of Time magazine, the Electronics King, he had realized that he had become a visible target. So when in public, he walked quickly, with his head bent. The glasses that he wore had been chosen to hide as much as possible of his round, handsome face. His suits were expensive, but anonymous. If he went to the theatre or to dinner, he always arrived at the last minute, preferring not to hang around. There were dozens of different security systems in his life, and although they had once annoyed him, he had allowed them to become routine. But ask any spy or security agent. Routine is the one thing that can get you killed. It tells the enemy where you're going and when you're going to be there. Routine was going to kill Michael J. Roscoe, and this was the day death had chosen to come calling. Of course, Roscoe had no idea of this as he stepped out of the lift directly into his private office, a huge room occupying the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows giving views in 2 directions: 5th Avenue to the north, Central Park to the west. The 2 remaining walls contained a door, a low bookshelf, and next to the lift, a single oil painting, a vase of flowers by Vincent van Gogh. The black glass surface of his desk was equally uncluttered. A computer, a leather notebook, a telephone, and a framed photograph of a 14-year-old boy. As he took off his jacket and sat down, Roscoe found himself looking at the picture of the boy. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and freckles. Paul Roscoe looked remarkably like his father 40 years ago. Roscoe was now 54, beginning to show his age despite his year-round tan. His son was almost as tall as him. The picture had been taken the summer before on Long Island. They had spent the day sailing, then they'd had a barbecue on the beach. It had been one of the few happy days they had ever had together. The door opened, and his secretary came in. Helen Bosworth was English. She had left her home and her husband to come and work in New York, and loved every minute of it. She had been working in this office for 11 years, and in all that time, she had never forgotten a detail or made a mistake. "Good morning, Mr. Roscoe," she said. "Good morning, Helen." She set down a folder on his desk. "The latest figures from Singapore, costings on the R-15 organizer. You have lunch with Senator Andrews at 12:30. I've booked the IB." "Did you remember to call London?" Roscoe asked. Helen Bosworth blinked. She never forgot anything, so why had he asked? I spoke to Alan Blunt's office yesterday afternoon, she said. Afternoon in New York would have been evening in London. Mr. Blunt was not available, but I've arranged a person-to-person call for you this afternoon. We can have it patched through to your car. Thank you, Helen. Shall I have your coffee sent through to you? No, thank you, Helen. I won't have coffee today. Helen Bosworth left the room, seriously alarmed. No coffee? Whatever next? Mr. Roscoe had begun his day with a double espresso for as long as she had known him. Could it be that he was ill? He certainly hadn't been himself recently, not since Paul had got back from that school in the south of France. And this phone call to Alan Blunt in London. Nobody had ever told her who he was, but she had seen his name in a file once. He was something to do with British military intelligence, MI6. What was Mr. Roscoe doing talking to a spy? Helen Bosworth returned to her office and soothed her nerves. Not with a coffee, she couldn't stand the stuff, but with a refreshing cup of English breakfast tea. Something very strange was going on, and she didn't like it. She didn't like it at all. Meanwhile, 60 floors below, a man had walked into reception wearing grey overalls with an ID badge attached to his chest. The badge identified him as Sam Green, maintenance engineer with Express Elevators, Inc. He was carrying a briefcase in one hand and a large silver toolbox in the other. He set them both down in front of the reception desk. Sam Green was not his real name. His hair, black and a little greasy, was fake, as were his glasses, moustache and uneven teeth. He looked 50 years old, but was actually nearer 30. Nobody knew his real name, but in the business he was in, a name was the last thing he could afford. He was known as the Gentleman, and he was one of the highest paid and most successful contract killers in the world.